Every night at exactly 11 p.m., a homeless mother forced her exhausted children to walk miles through freezing streets. People thought she was crazy. But when one stranger followed her, he uncovered a terrifying secret no one saw coming. Angela had stopped counting the nights a long time ago. At first, she used to remember every single one. The first night sleeping on a bus bench. The first night her children cried from hunger. The first night she stayed awake until sunrise because she was too afraid to close her eyes. But after a while, the nights blended together. Cold streets, heavy footsteps, streetlights flickering above cracked sidewalks, and always her children beside her. Marcus held her left hand tightly while little Sophie rested against her shoulder, half asleep as Angela carried her through the darkness. Her arms constantly ached, but she never complained. Mothers like her didn't have the luxury of complaining anymore. "Mom," Marcus whispered quietly one night, "why can't we stay somewhere normal?" Angela looked down at him. His small shoes were soaked from the rain. The soles were peeling apart. He was only 8 years old, but his face already carried the exhaustion of someone much older. She forced herself to smile. "We will soon, baby." It was the same answer she always gave. Not because she wanted to lie to him, but because hope was the only thing she still had left to give. The wind that night felt sharper than usual. Angela wrapped her thin jacket tighter around Sophie while continuing to walk. Her legs burned from exhaustion, but stopping was never an option. Stopping meant danger. Stopping meant being found. Most people who passed them barely looked twice. Some stared for a moment before quickly looking away. Others assumed Angela was irresponsible, lazy, broken. Nobody saw the truth hidden behind her tired eyes. Nobody knew she had once lived a completely normal life. There was a time when Marcus had birthday parties. A time when Sophie slept in a pink bedroom filled with stuffed animals. A time when Angela laughed easily. Back then, she worked 2 jobs and still came home every evening just to read bedtime stories to her children. She used to dance with them in the kitchen while cheap pasta boiled on the stove. They didn't have much money, but they had peace. Then Derek entered their lives. At first, he seemed like a blessing. He helped carry groceries, fixed broken cabinets, played basketball with Marcus outside the apartment building. For the first few months, Angela believed she had finally found someone dependable. But slowly, little things began changing. Derek hated when Angela talked to old friends. He hated when she stayed late at work. He hated when the children made noise. Then came the yelling. Then came the threats. Then came the apologies. Angela kept convincing herself things would improve because she wanted her children to have stability. She thought enduring pain quietly was better than raising them alone. Until the night Marcus saw Derek shove her across the kitchen. Angela would never forget the look in her son's eyes. Fear, not confusion, not surprise. Fear. That was the moment she realized staying would destroy her children far more than leaving ever could. So she ran. No suitcase. No plan. Just her children and whatever she could carry in one backpack. People often think courage looks loud and powerful. But sometimes courage looks like a terrified mother quietly walking away with nowhere to go. The shelters were supposed to help. At first, Angela believed they would. But every time she settled into one, Derek somehow found her again. The first shelter lasted 4 days. The second lasted a week. By the third one, Angela barely slept at all. Every sound outside made her heart race. Every unfamiliar face felt dangerous. One night, she spotted Derek's car parked 2 blocks away from the shelter entrance. That was enough. She grabbed the kids before sunrise and disappeared again. After that, Angela stopped trusting systems stopped trusting buildings, stopped trusting safety itself. Instead, she trusted movement. As long as they kept moving, they survived. That became her entire life. Walk during the night. Hide during the day. Protect the children at all costs. Even when her feet bled through worn-out shoes. Even when hunger twisted painfully in her stomach. Even when exhaustion made her vision blurry. Every decision she made centered around one thing only: keeping her children alive. One freezing evening, Marcus suddenly stopped walking. "I can't do it anymore," he cried softly. Angela immediately knelt beside him, despite her aching knees. "Yes, you can. My legs hurt. I know. I'm cold. I know, baby. Why is this happening to us?" That question nearly shattered her. Because children should never have to ask questions like that. Angela pulled Marcus into her arms while Sophie slept against her chest. For a moment, she almost broke down completely. Almost. But mothers like Angela learned how to cry silently. She kissed Marcus on the forehead. "This is not forever," she whispered. "How do you know?" Because she had to know. Because if she stopped believing that, everything would collapse. So she smiled through tears and said softly, "Because I'm your mom, and moms fix things." Marcus nodded slowly. He believed her. Children always want to believe their parents can protect them from the world, even when the parents themselves are terrified. That night, Angela skipped eating again so the children could split the last granola bars between them. She pretended she wasn't hungry, pretended everything was okay. Later, while the kids slept beside her in the abandoned basement, Angela stayed awake staring at the cracked ceiling above them. The cold air wrapped around her like ice. But her children were asleep safely beside her. And for Angela, that was enough. Not comfort. Not happiness. Just enough. Enough to survive one more night. Enough to keep walking tomorrow. Enough to keep being strong even when every part of her wanted to collapse. Because real mothers do not stop loving when life becomes cruel. If anything, they love harder. They sacrifice more. They carry pain silently, so their children don't have to carry it too. And somewhere deep inside Angela's exhausted heart lived one stubborn belief: she refused to let die. As long as her children were breathing safely beside her, she had not failed yet. Most people saw Angela the same way. A tired homeless woman sitting outside convenience stores with 2 children and a worn backpack. Nothing more. People walked past her every day without slowing down. Some avoided eye contact completely, as if looking at her too long would somehow make her struggle contagious. Others stared with silent judgment before moving on with their lives. A businessman once walked by while talking loudly on his phone. "She probably made bad choices," he muttered after glancing at Angela and her sleeping daughter. Angela heard him. She heard all of them. The whispers. The assumptions. The cold stares. After a while, she stopped reacting because explaining yourself to strangers became exhausting when nobody truly wanted to listen. To the outside world, homelessness looked simple. People assumed homeless families were careless, lazy, addicted, irresponsible. Very few ever stopped to wonder how quickly an ordinary life could fall apart. Angela used to wonder the same thing herself. Before all this happened, she never imagined she could end up sleeping in abandoned buildings or searching for safe places to hide at night. She used to pass homeless people too, sometimes feeling sympathy but never understanding how complicated their stories might actually be. Now she knew. Every homeless person carried a story nobody could see. A story buried beneath dirty clothes, tired eyes, and silence. One afternoon, Angela sat outside a small grocery store while Marcus and Sophie shared a sandwich someone had donated earlier that day. Marcus carefully tore his half in two and handed a piece to his sister. "You can have the bigger part," he told her. Angela watched quietly. Her chest tightened. Children who should have worried about cartoons and homework were learning survival instead. An elderly woman exiting the store paused nearby. She looked at Angela for a long moment before reaching into her purse and handing her $5. "Please don't spend it on drugs," the woman said gently. Angela froze. The words weren't screamed cruelly. In fact, the woman probably believed she was helping. But somehow that made it hurt even more. Angela nodded quietly anyway. "Thank you." The woman smiled politely and walked away, never realizing she had just reduced an entire human life into a stereotype. Angela stared down at the crumpled bill in her hand. She wanted to scream. Not because of the money, but because nobody ever asked what happened to her. Nobody asked why her daughter's asthma medicine sat inside that backpack. Nobody asked why Marcus constantly scanned crowds nervously despite being only 8 years old. Nobody asked why Angela looked terrified whenever unfamiliar men walked too close. People only saw the surface. And the surface looked ugly. Dirty shoes. Exhaustion. Homelessness. That was all they needed to decide who she was. One rainy evening, Angela and the children entered a crowded diner to warm up briefly. The smell of fresh coffee and hot food instantly filled the air. For a moment, Sophie smiled. "Mommy, it smells good." Angela swallowed painfully. A waitress approached their booth slowly, her smile tight and uncomfortable. Customers only," she said carefully. Angela immediately stood. "We understand." She gathered the children quietly before they could even sit down properly. Marcus lowered his head while following her toward the exit. As they stepped back into the freezing rain, he finally asked, "Why do people hate us?" Angela's heart cracked. "They don't hate us." "Then why do they look at us like that?" She didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a child that society often fears suffering because it reminds people how fragile life really is? How do you explain that many people would rather judge someone struggling than imagine themselves in the same position? Angela knelt beside him under the awning outside the diner. "Sometimes people only see what's outside," she whispered softly. Marcus frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means they don't know our story." Marcus looked back through the diner window, where families laughed around warm meals. Would they be nicer if they knew? Angela stared silently for a moment. "Some would," she admitted quietly. And it was true. Because every once in a while, someone did look deeper. Like the librarian downtown, who secretly let the children stay past closing time during cold evenings. Or the bakery worker who slipped extra bread into bags without charging them. Or Thomas. He noticed things other people ignored. The fear in Angela's eyes. The way she constantly checked behind her. The way Marcus positioned himself protectively near his little sister whenever strangers approached. Thomas realized something important. Homelessness itself was not the full story. It was only the visible ending of a much longer nightmare. One night, while bringing food to the abandoned church basement, Thomas finally asked carefully, "How long have you been running?" Angela looked startled. "Not homeless. Not broke. Running." For the first time in months, someone understood there was more beneath the surface. Angela looked down at her hands. "Almost 4 months." Thomas sat quietly while she slowly explained everything. The abuse. The shelters. The fear. The constant moving. When she finished speaking, silence filled the room. Finally, Thomas whispered, "You've been protecting those kids this whole time by yourself." Angela nodded weakly. "I didn't have a choice." Thomas looked around at the freezing basement wall and broken furniture. Most people would see failure there. But suddenly, he saw something else entirely. Sacrifice. Courage. Love. Because despite having almost nothing, Angela somehow kept her children fed, alive, and emotionally protected as best she could. She still brushed Sophie's hair every morning. Still comforted Marcus during nightmares. Still invented little games during long walks so the children wouldn't feel scared all the time. Even in survival mode, she fought desperately to preserve their childhood. Thomas realized homelessness had hidden her strength instead of revealing it. And maybe that was the tragedy of it all. Society often notices homeless people only after they lose everything visible. But invisible losses happen first. Safety, peace, dignity, trust. Angela didn't become homeless overnight. Her life unraveled piece by piece while nobody noticed. That's what most people never understand. Many homeless families are not strangers. They are exhausted workers, escaping mothers, children caught in disasters they never created. People who once had normal lives before one tragedy pushed them past the edge. Later that week, Angela sat at a traffic light holding Sophie close while cars lined up nearby. Inside one vehicle, a little girl stared curiously through the window at Marcus. The girl looked about the same age. For a brief second, their eyes met. One child sitting safely in a warm car. The other standing barefoot on cracked pavement. Yet neither child fully understood how different their worlds had become. The light turned green. Cars drove away. And once again, Angela disappeared into the crowd like someone the world had already decided not to see. But hidden behind her exhaustion was a story far heavier than the backpack resting on her shoulders. When Angela first met Derek, he made her feel safe. That was what hurt the most. He wasn't cruel in the beginning. He was patient, charming, protective in ways that felt comforting after years of struggling alone as a single mother. He brought groceries when money was tight, fixed broken things around the apartment, played with Marcus on the weekends. For the first time in years, Angela thought maybe life was finally becoming easier. Marcus liked him too. "Derek's funny," he once told Angela after the three of them spent an afternoon at the park. Angela smiled back then. She genuinely believed she was building a better future for her children. That's how abuse often begins. Not with fear, with trust. Slowly, little things started changing. Derek became irritated when Angela spent time talking to coworkers after shifts. He asked questions about where she had been, who she spoke to, why she took too long getting home. At first, Angela thought he was simply protective. Then came the criticism. "You really let Marcus act like that? Why is the apartment always messy? You spend money like crazy." None of it sounded dangerous alone. That was the terrifying part. Abuse rarely arrives all at once. It creeps in quietly until one day the person you love no longer feels recognizable. Angela started apologizing constantly without realizing it. Sorry dinner was late. Sorry the kids were loud. Sorry she forgot something at the store. Derek always had a way of making her feel responsible for his anger. One evening, Sophie accidentally spilled juice on the couch. She burst into tears immediately. Before Angela could comfort her, Derek slammed his hand against the table so hard the sound echoed through the apartment. "Look what she did." Sophie started shaking. Angela quickly pulled her daughter close. "It's okay, she's just scared." Maybe if you actually disciplined your kids, this wouldn't happen. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway watching everything silently. That was the first time Angela noticed fear in her children's eyes. And once a mother sees fear like that, she never forgets it. After that night, the apartment no longer felt peaceful. Everyone walked carefully around Derek's moods. Marcus became quieter. Sophie cried more easily. Angela constantly felt tension in her chest, even during calm moments. Because deep down, she knew explosions could happen anytime. The emotional abuse became relentless. Derek insulted Angela until she began doubting herself completely. "You're lucky I stay with you. No one else would deal with all this. You'd never survive without me." Over time, those words started sounding true inside her own mind. That's what emotional abuse does. It slowly destroys a person's confidence until they feel trapped inside their own life. Angela stopped talking to friends because Derek hated it. Stopped visiting family because it caused drama. Little by little, her world became smaller. And Derek became the center of everything. The children noticed more than she realized. One night Marcus quietly asked, "Why does Derek always yell at you?" Angela paused while folding laundry. "He's just stressed." Marcus looked unconvinced. "He doesn't yell at other people like that." Angela didn't know what to say. Because children often recognize unhealthy behavior long before adults admit it to themselves. The first time Derek became physically violent happened during an argument about money. Angela had secretly saved $20 for Marcus's school trip. When Derek found out, his face changed instantly. "You hiding money from me now?" "It was for Marcus." "You think I'm stupid?" Angela tried walking away. That's when he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. The room went silent. Even Derek looked shocked afterward. Then came the apology. Flowers, tears, promises. "It'll never happen again." Angela wanted to believe him. Not because she was weak. Because she was exhausted. Because leaving felt impossible. Because she feared raising 2 children alone with no support. So she stayed. And things got worse. The violence became unpredictable. Sometimes it was shoving. Sometimes grabbing. Sometimes punching walls inches away from her face while the children cried nearby. The emotional damage spread through the home like poison. Marcus began having nightmares. Sophie started covering her ears whenever adults raised their voices. Angela barely recognized herself anymore. She jumped at sudden sounds, apologized constantly, lived in permanent anxiety. Yet from outside, their family still looked normal. That was the frightening truth. Abuse often hides behind ordinary doors. Neighbors heard laughter sometimes. Coworkers saw Angela smiling at work. Nobody knew what happened after those apartment doors closed at night. One evening changed everything forever. Marcus accidentally dropped a plate while helping clean the kitchen. The plate shattered loudly across the floor. Derek exploded instantly. "What's wrong with you?" Marcus froze in terror. "He didn't mean to," Angela started. Derek shoved her violently into the kitchen table. Pain shot through her back as she hit the edge hard. For a moment, everything went silent. Then Angela looked up. Marcus was staring at her. Not crying. Not moving. Just staring. And the fear in his eyes broke something inside her forever. Because in that moment, she realized her son was learning what love looked like by watching this. He was learning fear instead of safety. Silence instead of trust. Pain instead of peace. That night, after Derek finally passed out drunk on the couch, Angela sat beside her sleeping children in darkness. Her bruised ribs ached every time she breathed. Marcus stirred awake slightly. "Mom." "Yeah, baby. Are we safe?" Angela nearly collapsed hearing those words. Children should never have to ask questions like that. And suddenly, she understood something clearly. Staying was no longer protecting them. Leaving was. People often ask why victims stay in abusive relationships. But they rarely ask the more important question. Why does abuse make leaving feel impossible? Angela had nowhere to go. No savings. No stable support system. 2 children depending entirely on her. And a man who constantly convinced her she would fail without him. Fear traps people long before physical violence begins. Still, sometime before sunrise, Angela made her choice. Quietly, carefully, she packed clothes into one backpack. Medicine, documents, a few snacks. Then she woke the children gently. Marcus looked confused. "Where are we going?" Angela held his hand tightly. "Away." That single word changed all their lives. They slipped out of the apartment, while Derek slept only feet away. Angela's heart pounded so hard she thought it might wake him. Every stair creaked loudly. Every second felt dangerous. But somehow they made it outside. Cold air hit Angela's face as dawn slowly approached. For the first time in years, she felt terrified. But free. The children climbed onto an early morning bus beside her. Marcus leaned against her shoulder sleepily, while Sophie held her stuffed rabbit close. Angela stared out the window silently. She had no idea where they would sleep that night. No idea how she would survive. But one thing mattered more than anything else. Her children were no longer inside that apartment. And sometimes escaping abuse doesn't look heroic or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a frightened mother holding her children on a nearly empty bus at sunrise, while trying not to cry in front of them. Thomas had seen homeless people almost every night during his delivery shifts. People sleeping near bus stations, families standing outside convenience stores, men pushing shopping carts filled with blankets and plastic bags. After years of driving through the city late at night, he had learned to glance at suffering without stopping for it. Not because he was cruel, because life teaches people to keep moving. But something about Angela and her children stayed in his mind. The first time he noticed them, rain poured heavily across the streets while most people hurried indoors. Angela walked quickly through the storm carrying her little girl, while Marcus struggled to keep pace beside her. Thomas slowed at a red light and watched them briefly. The children looked exhausted. Angela looked terrified. Not lost. Not hopeless. Terrified. That difference bothered him. Over the next few weeks, he saw them again and again. Always at night. Always moving. Always looking over their shoulders. One evening, Thomas parked outside a small diner while waiting for a food order. Through the window, he spotted Angela sitting with her children near the corner booth. Marcus was smiling faintly while sharing fries with his sister. For a moment, they looked almost normal. Then the waitress approached their table awkwardly. Thomas couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but he saw Angela immediately gather the children and leave. Outside, Marcus lowered his head while following his mother back into the cold streets. Thomas watched them disappear. Something twisted painfully inside him. Because he remembered what it felt like when his own mother struggled years earlier. After Thomas's father left, his mother worked double shifts cleaning office buildings at night. There were evenings when she skipped meals pretending she wasn't hungry so he could eat instead. Nobody helped her either. People judged her constantly. Single mother. Behind on bills. Always tired. Thomas still remembered overhearing relatives whispering about her failures, while she worked herself nearly to death trying to survive. Maybe that was why Angela's face haunted him. He recognized the exhaustion, the silent desperation, the stubborn determination to protect children, no matter the cost. One freezing night, Thomas saw Marcus limping badly while walking beside Angela. The boy's shoes were torn almost completely open. Without thinking much, Thomas pulled his van closer and rolled down the window. "Hey," he called gently. Angela instantly stiffened. Her entire body reacted like danger had suddenly appeared beside her. "You okay?" Thomas asked carefully. "We're fine." Her answer came too quickly. Thomas noticed how tightly she held her daughter. Not defensive. Protective. "I've got extra food from a canceled order," he said. "You can take it." Angela hesitated. Thomas could practically see the battle happening inside her mind. Trust was dangerous for people like her. Finally, Marcus looked up hopefully. Angela swallowed hard. "Okay," she whispered. Thomas handed over 2 warm food containers. Marcus's eyes widened immediately. "Chicken nuggets." Sophie smiled for the first time Thomas had ever seen. Angela looked close to tears. "Thank you. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Because sometimes the smallest kindness mattered most to people surviving impossible situations. That night, Thomas drove away thinking about how quickly those children had smiled over a simple hot meal. Something about that broke his heart. Over the following days, Thomas started carrying extra food during deliveries just in case he saw them again. And he always did. Same streets. Same late hours. Same fear hidden in Angela's eyes. Finally, one night, curiosity overwhelmed him. Rain flooded the sidewalks while strong wind rattled street signs overhead. Thomas spotted Angela rushing through the storm with the children wrapped tightly beside her. Marcus could barely walk anymore. Thomas parked quietly and followed from a distance. At first, he felt guilty doing it. But deep down, he sensed something was seriously wrong. Angela led the children far away from crowded areas. Past closed stores. Past abandoned buildings. Past the parts of the city most people avoided entirely. Eventually, she stopped near an old abandoned church. Thomas watched carefully as Angela moved a wooden panel near the basement entrance and guided the children inside. His chest tightened instantly. They were living there, in freezing temperatures, without electricity, without protection. Thomas sat silently in his van, staring at the dark church for several minutes. He thought about leaving, calling someone, pretending he never saw any of it. That would have been easier, safer. But before he could decide, headlights appeared down the street. A black SUV rolled slowly toward the church. Angela noticed it too. Even from a distance, Thomas saw panic explode across her face. She shoved the children toward the basement entrance desperately. Then a man stepped out of the SUV. Thomas immediately understood. The fear in Angela's eyes suddenly made sense. The man shouted aggressively while approaching her. Thomas couldn't hear every word clearly, but he saw enough. The threats, the intimidation, the terror on Marcus's face. Then the man grabbed Angela violently. Thomas moved before fully thinking. 1 second he sat frozen inside the van. The next he was sprinting through rain toward them. "Let her go." The man turned sharply. Everything happened fast after that. Shouting, pushing, rain pouring harder across the pavement. Thomas wasn't some action hero. He was scared too. But fear mattered less than what he was seeing. Because no child should watch their mother get hurt like that. The man swung at Thomas. They crashed onto wet pavement while Angela pulled the children backward. Thomas barely managed to hold him off long enough for nearby residents to notice the chaos. Lights turned on in apartment windows nearby. Someone yelled they were calling police. The man panicked and fled back into the SUV before speeding away. For several seconds, silence filled the street except for rain. Angela collapsed onto the curb, shaking uncontrollably. Marcus cried while hugging his little sister tightly. Thomas stood there breathing heavily. He suddenly realized how close he had come to serious danger. But strangely, he didn't regret it. Not even slightly. Angela looked up at him through tears. "Why did you help us?" The question hit him hard. Because she sounded genuinely confused. As if kindness itself had become unfamiliar. Thomas sat beside her carefully. "My mom struggled a lot when I was a kid," he admitted quietly. Angela wiped tears from her face silently. She used to say people survive because somebody finally chooses to care. Angela looked down. For months, the world had mostly ignored her pain. Ignored her children. Ignored the fear consuming their lives every night. Then one stranger decided not to look away. And that changed everything. Police eventually arrived and took Angela's statement properly for the first time. Thomas showed them recordings from his phone capturing part of the confrontation. For the first time in months, Angela felt like someone actually believed her. Thomas continued helping after that night. Not because he wanted praise. Not because he thought of himself as special. But because once you truly see someone suffering, pretending not to care becomes impossible. He helped Angela contact domestic violence support services. Brought warm blankets for the children. Sat with Marcus during difficult moments. Sometimes he simply listened. And slowly, the children began trusting again. One afternoon, Sophie handed Thomas a crayon drawing she had made. It showed 3 people standing beneath a bright yellow sun. "That's you," she said proudly. Thomas smiled softly. Because children remember kindness in ways adults often forget. Years later, Angela would still think about how close she came to losing hope completely. And how one ordinary delivery driver changed the direction of her family's entire future, simply because he chose compassion over indifference. The first night inside the apartment felt unreal. Angela stood silently near the doorway while Marcus and Sophie explored every corner like they had just entered another world. The place was tiny. The wallpaper peeled near the kitchen sink. One cabinet door hung crooked. The heater made strange noises every few minutes. But to Angela, it was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. Because it was safe. No abandoned church basement. No freezing concrete floors. No fear of footsteps outside in the middle of the night. Just walls. A locked door. And peace. Marcus ran into the bedroom and jumped onto the mattress the housing program had provided. "Mom," he shouted excitedly, "it's soft." Sophie laughed while spinning in circles near the window. Angela covered her mouth quickly as tears filled her eyes. For months, she had forced herself not to imagine moments like this because hope felt dangerous. Every time life seemed ready to improve, something terrible happened. But now, standing in that tiny apartment while hearing her children laugh again, something inside her slowly began healing. Thomas leaned against the doorway, carrying another box of donated supplies. "Need help with the kitchen stuff?" Angela wiped her eyes quickly and smiled. "I think I forgot how normal people live." Thomas smiled gently. "You survived, that's enough." Survived. Angela thought about that word long after Thomas left that evening. Because survival was all she had focused on for so long. Wake up. Protect the kids. Find food. Avoid danger. Keep moving. There was never time to think about the future. Now suddenly, there was one. That night, Angela tucked Sophie into bed first. Her daughter held the blanket tightly while looking around the room nervously. Mommy. Yeah, baby. What if we have to leave again? The question shattered Angela's heart. Even after escaping danger, fear still lived inside her children. Angela sat beside her daughter carefully. We're safe here. How do you know? Because for the first time, Angela finally believed it herself. She brushed Sophie's hair gently behind her ear. Because nobody's chasing us anymore. Sophie slowly relaxed into the pillow. Within minutes, she was asleep. Deep asleep. Not the restless sleep of frightened children constantly waking at small sounds. Real sleep. Peaceful sleep. Angela quietly closed the bedroom door halfway and walked into the living room where Marcus sat staring out the window. You okay? She asked softly. Marcus nodded at first. Then suddenly his face crumpled. I thought he was gonna find us forever. Angela immediately pulled him into her arms. Marcus finally broke down crying. Months of fear poured out of him all at once. Children try to stay strong longer than adults realize. Marcus had spent months pretending bravery for his mother and little sister. But now the danger was finally gone. And he didn't have to pretend anymore. Angela held him tightly while tears rolled down her own face. I'm sorry, she whispered. Marcus shook his head instantly. You saved us. Those 3 words nearly broke her completely. Because after everything, her son still saw her as his protector. Not broken. Not weak. A protector. Later that night, after both children finally slept, Angela sat alone at the kitchen table. Silence filled the apartment. No traffic nearby. No shouting. No footsteps echoing through dark streets. Just silence. And somehow, silence felt unfamiliar now. Angela stared at her hands. They still carried scars from months of survival. Her body ached constantly from exhaustion she hadn't fully processed yet. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to stop surviving for one moment and simply breathe. Then she cried harder than she ever had before. Not soft tears. Not hidden tears. The kind that shake your entire body. Because trauma doesn't disappear the moment safety arrives. Sometimes pain waits until safety before finally coming out. Angela cried for every night her children slept hungry. Every mile they walked in freezing weather. Every moment Marcus looked afraid. Every time Sophie asked if they were going to die. And somewhere beneath all that pain, she cried because they had made it. Against every obstacle. Against every fear. They survived. Weeks slowly passed. Life remained difficult, but it no longer felt impossible. Angela found part-time work at a small grocery store nearby. The pay wasn't much, but it was honest work. Every paycheck felt like a step toward rebuilding their lives. Thomas continued checking on them often. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes pizza. Sometimes he simply sat and talked while the children laughed nearby. One evening, Marcus asked him, "Why did you help us?" Thomas looked surprised. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Yes, you do," Marcus insisted. Thomas glanced toward Angela quietly. "Because someone should have helped sooner." Angela looked down silently. That sentence stayed with her. Because it was true. So many people had seen their suffering. But most kept walking. Not out of cruelty. Out of distance. It's easier to ignore pain when it doesn't belong to you. But kindness begins the moment someone decides another person suffering matters. Months later, Sophie's asthma improved dramatically now that she slept indoors consistently. Marcus started attending school again and slowly acted like a normal child for the first time in nearly a year. One afternoon, Angela found him laughing loudly while playing basketball outside the apartment complex with other kids. She froze watching him. She had forgotten that sound. A child laughing freely without fear. Tears quietly filled her eyes again. Healing happens slowly. Sometimes so slowly you barely notice it. Until one day, you realize your children are smiling again. One winter evening, the family decorated a tiny second-hand Christmas tree Thomas had surprised them with. The ornaments didn't match. The lights flickered unevenly. But Sophie stared at it like it was magic. "Mommy," she whispered softly, "this is the best Christmas ever." Angela smiled through tears. Because the greatest gift wasn't presents. It was safety, warmth, peace. Things most people take for granted every single day. Later that night, after the children fell asleep beside the glowing tree lights, Angela stood near the apartment window quietly. Snow drifted gently outside. For a moment, she remembered all those freezing nights walking through darkness, carrying her children while pretending everything would somehow be okay. Back then she felt invisible. Forgotten. Like the world had stopped caring whether her family survived or not. But now she understood something important. Hope is strange. Sometimes it disappears completely. Sometimes it survives quietly in tiny forms. A stranger offering food. A child still believing in you. A locked apartment door after months of fear. Hope rarely arrives dramatically. Often it returns in small moments that slowly teach your heart how to feel safe again. Angela looked toward the bedroom where Marcus and Sophie slept peacefully. Then she whispered something softly into the quiet apartment. "We made it." And for the first time in a very long time, she truly believed those words. The world outside remained imperfect. There were still families suffering. Still mothers walking dangerous streets, trying to protect children nobody noticed. Still people silently drowning behind tired eyes. But Angela's story proved something powerful. A single act of compassion can interrupt someone's nightmare. One person choosing kindness can completely change another family's future. Most people will never fully understand the battles strangers are fighting quietly around them. The exhausted cashier. The homeless woman at the bus stop. The frightened child sitting silently beside their parent. Everyone carries hidden pain. And sometimes the strongest people are not the loudest ones. Sometimes strength looks like a mother walking miles through freezing nights just to keep her children alive. Sometimes courage looks like leaving abuse with nowhere to go. Sometimes heroism looks like surviving one more day when giving up feels easier. Angela eventually learned that being saved didn't make her weak. Accepting help didn't erase her strength. It simply meant she no longer had to carry the entire world alone. Years later, Marcus would barely remember the abandoned church basement. Sophie would forget most of those terrifying nights completely. But Angela would always remember one truth. Even in the darkest moments of life, kindness still has the power to bring people back from the edge. And sometimes the people society overlooks the fastest are the ones fighting the hardest battles no one can see. The moral of the story is simple. Never judge someone by their situation because you may never know the pain they survived to stay alive. And never underestimate the power of kindness, because one caring person can change the direction of someone's entire life forever. Disclaimer: this story is created for educational and inspirational purposes. Some scenes and characters are dramatized to reflect real-life struggles faced by many families around the world. Viewer discretion is advised, as the story contains emotional themes including homelessness and domestic abuse.